Do we need to study abroad, like overseas, like in Medina or Mecca, or?
I think there's something wrong, I mean, for my personal view in this, when we have to study the religion somewhere else. I'm less interested in really the content of Islam. I'm interested in the very sociological processes that allow particular version of that content of Islam to become authoritative. I do not consider Islam as a prepackaged, universal idea.
Because the argument is always like Islam and democracy. Islam and democracy in Indonesia, is it problematic for you?
Why do we need to even talk about Islam and democracy? I just do not see the relevance. I'm always skeptical about this kind of modernist aspiration for unity, for uniformity, etc. As if unity and uniformity is what creates strength. No, I think the strength of the tradition is precisely in its ability to become local in different places.
We are delighted to welcome Dr. Ismail Fajrie Alatas. May I call you Mas Aji?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So you currently teach Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies and History at the New York University.
That's right.
You are also a distinguished scholar, of course, with degrees from the University of Melbourne, National University of Singapore, and University of Michigan. And more recently, you are also the author of the book, What is Religious Authority?, which is a groundbreaking work that discusses the conventional understandings of Islam, focusing on trans-regional networks and the articulatory labor involved in shaping Muslim communities. Mm-hmm. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Mas Aji. So, in regard to your book, we learned that you were well trained in traditional education while you've been away for quite a while to learn Islam from Western educational system or maybe paradigm. So I think it's very interesting. And then you moved to Australia when you were 14 years old, and then you studied there, and then to Singapore, and then to the US. So what did you learn from your journey, and then it arrived to your last research on religious authority? So can you tell us more about that?
Thank you, first of all, for having me. I guess in regards to my own personal trajectory and its relation to my own work, I think they are very much, interconnected. Having lived abroad since I was 14 gave me or provided me with critical distance to see my own culture, to see my own religion, to see my own civilization. And that, I think, is one of the most important aspect of being away from Indonesia, that shaped the way I look at this country, I look at its history, and I look at my own religion. And I think that's a privilege. It's a privileged perspective. Most people, were born and grew up and lived and die within the closed sphere of their own culture and religion. So they were not able to develop that kind of critical distance. And so I came to appreciate my religion, my culture, my civilization, precisely, by being away from it. I became more interested. I tried to look at it holistically. And for that reason, I chose to study history and anthropology as opposed to, say, Islamic studies. Because Islamic studies usually looked at the content of religion, right? Religious teachings, juristic theories, philosophy, Sufism, and so on and so forth. I'm less interested in that. And if you read my book, I'm less interested in really the content of Islam. I'm interested in the very sociological processes that allow particular version of that content of Islam to become authoritative, right? And that's what led me to really trying to understand, if Islam is such a polyphonic reality, that there are so many different definitions of Islam and different articulations of Islamic teachings, then the question becomes what made certain teachings more authoritative than others. And that is a sociological question. Right? It's not a doctrinaire question. It's not a question about what is right and what is wrong, what is, considered to be orthodox or heterodox, but really it's about the sociological processes that allow certain interpretation to become authoritative and socially consequential. And so that is very much my approach in understanding the religion and its history. So I do not consider Islam as and this I said it very clearly in the book, I do not consider Islam as a prepackaged, universal idea, but it is something that is subject to historical becoming in different parts through its encounters with different cultures and social dynamics.
But I believe it is within the idea of Sunnah, right? The Sunnah tradition, not in the Sharia. The like praying, like the 5 principles of Islam.
Oh no, that's precisely why I use I focus on the term Sunnah, because the Sunnah is really, in my understanding, Sunnah is really the normative ideals of what Islam is. Okay? And every single Muslims all across the world from different schools of thought would recognize the authority of something called Sunnah, and yet nobody really agrees on the actual content of that Sunnah. Which is why for me, I consider Sunnah as more like as an empty signifier, as a floating signifier that Muslims throughout history have tried to fill in, right? That's why they come with different definitions of what is considered Sunnah, which other Muslims would consider as bid'ah, right? While others considered as Sunnah. So that is actually the very discursive dynamic that makes up the social life of Islam.
I believe in homeground ulama or homeground ustad or maybe Habib. So what do you think on that? Because what I understood, when we move to different country, normally people in that particular country will rely on some Habib or ulama or ustad in that particular country, but they actually not originally from that area. Sometimes it's becoming very difficult for the indigenous, let's say, indigenous people living there, born there and raised there, to understand what is actually the person is teaching. So you've traveled a lot to different countries. What do you think?
Yeah. So I have, in regards to this is a very good question, and in regards to this question, I want to share something very personal. I teach at New York University, and New York University has a very vibrant and thriving Islamic center headed by the chaplain, what's his name, Khalid Latif, which is a very progressive imam and really a community builder in every sense of the word. He's able to build a community that is open to everybody. You would see, people dressed in very different ways. You can see people from different cultures, LGBTQ, straights, whatever it is, yes, different sexual orientations, different religious orientations, and yet he's able to make everybody feel welcome, right? And it's thriving. Every Ramadan, they have iftar, every single night, right? And suhoor as well. And sometimes I would go and attend the Friday prayer there. And I never felt comfortable. I never felt comfortable there. And gradually I realized, why is it that I do not feel comfortable? Because Khalid Latif's, what I realized is that Khalid Latif is actually cultivating an American Islamic community, right? So his message resonate with those who were born and grew up in America. It's not a Bengali Islam or Kashmiri Islam or Hadhrami Islam or Indonesian Islam. It's an American Islam. And precisely because he's able to speak in the local idiom, talking about the very local problems, the actual problems that people are facing, he's able to cultivate a community, right? But of course, somebody like me, who is not an American, who did not grow up in America, would not find
It's
it
a bit confusing, right?
Not really confusing. It just
There's
does
a
not resonate.
disconnect. There's a disconnect.
There's no resonate. There's no resonance, right? It's really. I mean, the problem that he's talking about is not really my problem. The aspects of the religion that he's trying to articulate is not really what I find interesting, which is fine, and that's precisely why he is successful. Right? Which is why also in places like New York or even Australia, you lived in Australia, you also still see ethnic mosques, right? Turkish mosque, Bengali mosque, Egyptian mosque, etc., catered to the migrant populations, right? The generation of people who were born abroad and migrated to these countries who, like me, would not be able to find resonance in the kind of American or Australian Islamic
seeking community.
Of course. I mean, seeking community and seeking message that resonate to them.
Cultural context with
Absolutely.
regards
and
to
so that shows. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
There would be something wrong if Khalid Latif's message resonate with me instead of his jama'ah, right? His community that he tries to.
I think that's the argument that you've been doing in the book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
What's the idea of, like, for example, Indonesians? Do we need to study abroad, like overseas, like in Medina or Mecca, or because the way in which they teach Islam there, of course, is based on that particular society.
Right.
So
right.
How do we reconcile with that?
No, I don't think we even need to reconcile. I don't think it's needed. Okay. I think there's something wrong, I mean, for my personal view in this, when we have to study the religion somewhere else.
Oh, really?
I think so. I mean, what's the point? You live and you grew up in a particular place. Why study the religion from another place? Mm-hmm. Where, of course, the kind of education, the kind of problems they are facing, the kind of theological thinking and juridical thinking that they are doing are very much based on the particularity of that place. It's different if you go abroad to seek ijazahs, to seek, just to enrich and multiply your isnad and your silsila, etc. That's fine. But substantively, I think religion ought to be grounded in the very locality.
Sorry, but couldn't you argue that, like, the kind of education you would need that's grounded in, like, the particularities of that study would be best found in the places where it originated? Like, you could argue that, not that I'm obviously very knowledgeable in religious studies, but people would go for years and years to study one specific form, one specific science, you'd call it, of religious studies in a certain place, and because that is where it is from, that is where it is, like, deeply studied. Couldn't you argue that? Like, the particularities of religion within your local community are, of course, true to where you are, but I know the universality of religion is what you talk about in the book, but it's, again, going back to the law of it. It's not
to the what?
To the law of religion. Like,
the law is a cultural process. What is the law? Law is a cultural process.
I mean, probably the prayers, sadaqah, zakat.
That's, again, variable with sunnah.
Okay.
But see, I'm lacking, like, the terms to discuss this. But intellectually, obviously, you can get knowledge from anywhere. But to get it from its source, right? Not that it's the same, quote unquote source. Not that it's the same as what it always was, but those are the institutions where, like, that is what they teach. Yeah.
I'm hesitant to attribute or to define the source as a geographic region or a particular locality. The source of the religion is the Prophet,
sure,
right? And the time when he lived, right? The time of revelation. But that time is gone, finished. It's past. It can no longer be accessed. And it's precisely because of that temporal estrangement to the prophetic past that allows people to actually try to uncover and recover that past from the vantage point of a particular present, of a particular locality, of a particular geographic region. So the fact that the source or the foundation of the religion no longer exists, in my view, is what allows Islam to become local religions everywhere it goes, right? And so I do not, okay, for example, oh, you go to Al-Azhar to study, principles of jurisprudence. Yeah, but do we actually need that? That is the question that one needs to ask as well. If you ask the jurists, they would say, yeah, of course we need the principle of jurisprudence. Yeah, but if we really want to go back to the source, to the prophetic era, there's no such a thing. It's more of a living process of intercultural communication between the prophet and the reality on the ground. And when the prophet sent out his companions, and after the prophet died and his companions went to different places, they did not have the benefits of all these theoretical apparatuses like principles of Islamic Judaism. All of these disciplines developed in an imperial context for a particular imperial purposes. There was an Islamic empire, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and they needed some more complex structure, legal structures and theological structures, etc. Fine, that's what they needed. But I don't think that that is really necessary in different parts of the world.
Could we argue that, from your argument, we need to really understand our own social boundaries? I mean, like, in which we were born. Then we studied there for about 9 years, 6 years. Then we moved to different country, like to Medina or Mecca, just to deepen our understanding from different perspectives. So when we go back, we could have at least comparison, or then we could expand our horizon.
Yeah, fine. I mean, comparison is great, but I think the more primary need is an understanding of your social reality. I think it takes more than a lifetime even to master the complexity of this region called Indonesia. Why do you even want to? I mean, we haven't even finished comparing Java and Sulawesi and the whole rich cultures of these regions. Why compare it to Arabia?
I think I agree with you on that matter, because I've observed that there are Assatis in Indonesia that never have really basic understanding of what is Islam in Indonesia. Then they study straight away in Medina or Makkah, and then they went back to Indonesia teaching what they learned there, and then it seems very, what we call radical, which is not actually radical if we sorry, this is the term that is too deeply discussed. But anyway, some people might see them as alien to the local traditions, Indonesian traditions. Is that what you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And this does not only pertain to religion, but it also pertains to economics and pertains to political science, etc. People go to the United States and they learn, for example, liberal economic theory, and then they think that this is something that can be applied to Indonesia without really understanding, for example, the culture, the moral economy of the region. So, religion is also the same, I think.
So you are a Habib. So could you explain more about that? Because I think you might be something at one point reflect to your own self. Like probably at one point okay, I'm Habib. So what does it mean? When you move to Australia, for example, and then you recollect what things that you have learned before about your own identity, and then you interact with your own situations, how the realization came to you, understanding your own identity, and then how you make it real for your life. Because I think it's a bit confusing for you as well as a person to grow as a Habib while you move to different country in which the tradition is not there. I mean, like there is. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, of course, I came from the Ba'alawi lineage, right? What people usually refer to Habib or Habaib. But you see, I did not grow up in that tradition. Like my parents, for example, were secular educated people. My father was a medical doctor and he was in politics, etc. So I did not grow up, say, in an Arab enclave or a Ba'alawi enclave in Pekalongan or Surabaya, etc., etc. So, for example, even comparing me to my sister and my brother, my siblings, they did not know anything about this tradition because we were not brought up. I was brought up in South Jakarta, and so, but I became very interested in that. And I remember when I was a kid, my father forbade me to hang around with the fellow Ba'alawis because he's just worried that you would not study properly, etc. So he wants you to be part of the broader Indonesian society and have that kind of versatility to live in the among the majority population. And so that is actually what sparked my interest, right? When you're a kid and you're a naughty kid like me, when your parent says A, don't do A, you do the opposite. So that's how I became actually interested in it, and that became an attempt to really, first of all, to understand myself and my background and history. But then what I realized, actually, looking at the history of the Ba'alawi allowed me to think more broadly about Islam and about history and about authority, etc. So my question, of course, my question began as a very specific specialist question of the Ba'alawi historiography, but it's no longer there, which is why, my last book, the question was, what is religious authority? I just used the Ba'alawi as a case study to really try to answer this big question, right? I'm not a historian of the Ba'alawis or Habaib, etc. No, my question is not really specific to that.
I've seen your videos on YouTube. You did some preaching, but in a way, like in a style of Habib. What we see in Indonesia.
You're referring to my, when I was spending 2 years of ethnographic field work in Pekalongan with Habib Lutfi.
You were very fluent in that tradition, it seems to me. How did you learn that?
As I became interested, I seek out the tradition. I try to live in that tradition. I sought teachers here in Indonesia. I went to the Hadramaut to study and to meet all the reputable teachers, because that's what you do when you're interested in something and you want to gain an in-depth understanding of it. Then you sit with them. It's not enough just to read the books and the history. You sit and you try to suture yourself into the form of life that tradition created, and that's what I did, which is why I became interested in anthropology, because anthropology is the academic discipline that is premised on the very notion of learning an alternative form of life. And it's a form of life that I did not grow up with. It's a form of life that I became interested, later on. And so I wanted to learn how to live in that form of life. And then gradually, after you develop some understanding of that form of life, to write it, and to analyze it. And so that's what, that's my relationship with the tradition. And then you came to appreciate that.
Are you interested to do the same thing again? I mean, like, you are not now is a scholar in the US. So I think you are very good in doing what you did. I mean, it's for me, as someone who was raised in that particular tradition, I think, he's really good in doing that. I think, but you are now doing something that is really extremely different in the epistemological way. The way you do it is very different. Are you interested to go back, like doing that again?
The short answer to that is no. I don't think I will do it. Simply because after learning about the tradition, after learning about how somebody becomes authoritative, how somebody becomes cultivate authority and cultivate the religious community, I understand how tiresome is the whole process.
24/7.
It is a full-time job, 24/7, and it needs a lot of patience and perseverance, right? Something that I do not think I have what it takes to do that. Because see, the problem, the whole process of cultivating a community is that you cannot stop, right? Which is why I use the term labor, and this is how Hannah Arendt defines labor as opposed to work. Work is something that you create something and that's it. Like you create a work of art, then you sell it, that's it, done. Job is done. But with labor, it is something that is continuous. When you stop, it just simply dissipates, right? So it's an everyday struggle, something that I don't think I am I'm capable of doing it. Really, it needs a lot of patience. It needs a lot of perseverance. it's a lot, right? I mean, you have to do fundraising, you have to listen to people's problems, you have to do counseling, you have to. The people think that, oh, look at all these religious figures, they drove around in their Alphard and they have money, the people give money, yeah, but in order to reach that level, you have to spend a lot of money. Generosity is very important. You want to establish a Maulid gathering, then you have to make sure that you have goats to slaughter and food to feed people, and is an ongoing process, right?
I think that's the thing that I think people in Indonesia misunderstood, or probably overseas. They criticize Habib, they criticize Kiai for accepting quote-unquote bribes, social bribes.
Yeah, no, it's a gift economy. It's a moral economy, right? Something that comes to you and you are obliged to give it away, to redistribute it.
It's not yours to keep.
It's not yours to keep, no. Because once you do not spend, then people will start to question your authority, right? That's precisely, because authority is not simply about knowledge. You can be so knowledgeable, but are you really authoritative? I always said this, wherever I go, you can write multi-volume works on Islamic law or Islamic theology, but are you authoritative?
Exactly.
Not necessarily. If it's just on the bookshelf and nobody reads them, I don't think it's what authority is. Someone can have like limited knowledge, but he can give benefit to his surroundings and people follow him, etc. Then that's, for me, is what authority is.
I think this tradition doesn't exist in a similar way, particularly in Western countries, in my observation. But how do you reconcile that? I mean,
what does not exist?
The tradition that the cultivation of community.
No, I think it exists everywhere in the world.
Everywhere, like in the US or in Australia.
I just gave you an example of Khalid Latif. And Khalid Latif, would fight left and right to make sure that the Muslim students have a space in the university, right? He would go and knock on doors to fundraise, to make sure that he can establish a daily iftar during Ramadan. I mean, this is a lot of money. I mean, he has to spend $7,400 a night just to feed students, right? Free iftar.
And that's for the whole month.
For the whole month of Ramadan. Where does he get that money? He's not a rich person. Yeah. That's precisely why he needs to go and knock on doors, contacting alumni. He would, write emails every Friday, giving reports on what the Islamic Center is doing, what activities are doing, how's the budgeting, etc. And he always asks, if anybody want to request dua, if the parents are sick or etc. Let me know so I will be able to mention their names during the liturgical session. That's cultivation. That's cultivating community. So I think it's everywhere. Authority is not something automatic. Authority is something, as I said, it's a function of labor. It cannot be divorced from labor. Once you stop doing the labor, it perished.
I think you've touched this particular issue in which social media influencers, whether they could be called as someone who has the authority or not. Because like you said, I think in one of the interviews that I've watched, you said that, is it possible for a person, influencer, to just call his followers to come, like what Habib did?
Absolutely. That's actually questionable for me, right? Somebody may have a lot of digital followers and web-based followers, but is it really a community? Can the followers actually contact that influencer when they have some needs that they needed some solution to? I think that shows the fragility and the fleeting temporality. I would say that what influencers and social media or even televangelists do, they have a public.
They have an audience.
They have an audience. They have a public, right? And we know from theory of the public is that the temporality of the public is the temporality of attention. So once you are no longer attentive to it, then you are no longer the public of that the person, right? You only have a public insofar as people are paying attention to you. So once, for example, you give a sermon on TV and people are attentive to, then those people are your public. But once they got distracted and do something else, then they are no longer your public, right? That is very different from jama'ah, from community, because community have an attachment that actually stabilize, right? That is more stable, that can survive the fleeting temporality of a public. So that's the difference between the two.
But I was basically just going to ask that, like, how the currency currently with social media use is our attention, right? And so you said that when there's no longer the attention, then you've lost the public. But a lot of times now is what is shared and what is communicated is meant to, like, it's meant to influence you, right? That's where the term influencer comes from. So without having our specific attention, it still grabs the influence, you know? So what are your thoughts on that, basically?
Okay, so as I said, the temporality of a public is the temporality of attention, right? Yes. So they are considered as the public of so-and-so when they are attentive to the discourse of that person. But that does not mean that it does not have any consequences beyond the temporality of the public, which is precisely what influence is. The
discourse is still being perpetuated, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the influencers are, right? That the effect of the influencers is that, okay, they will get some message across, and that message will stay with their audience even when they are no longer his or her audience.
That's the whole point of it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, but the question, of course, is that is this kind of economy of attention is durable enough to create a moral economy, right? And a form of loyalty that we see with this kind of village-based kiais or Habibs in their majlis ta'lim or the pesantrens, etc. I doubt.
Yeah, no, it's not building a community.
It's not, because people are smart. We always think, see, this is the problem with some analysts, where they think that they attribute too much agency to the religious leaders, as if, oh, these religious leaders are manipulating the audience, the jama'ahs, and they are and the jama'ahs are so stupid that they would follow these manipulative scholars. No, the jama'ah is never stupid. The jama'ah is always evaluating. They are always involved in evaluating their other people who they follow, and they can choose, very quickly to just stop following. I mean, that happened with so many people here. Somebody got married and got another wife, and then suddenly the jama'ah just simply, went away.
Yeah. What is actually happening out there? Because what I've seen, at least in social media, when Habib or Gus or some blow something into the bottle with water in it, and then people will criticize that particular event, in which, based on the followers, I think it's logical because they have their own understanding of that particular relations with the Habib or Gus. So what is actually happening, the way in which people could easily criticize other traditions with their own particular way of seeing things?
Right. See, because tradition, whether religious or not, is not simply a form of language. Tradition is a combination between a form of language and a form of life. You see, so the language has to be learned. The language of a particular tradition, the grammar of a particular tradition has to be learned. But you can only learn it by actually living in that tradition.
Anthropological approach.
Yeah, and that's precisely what living in a pesantren is, right? You're not only simply, going to take a course on Islam. No, you actually live with the kiai and look at his daily activities. That's precisely how you become part of a tradition. When somebody has not been exposed or has not lived in the form of life that makes up a tradition, and suddenly sees some practice or some language or some discourse from the traditions, then they would attribute, the way in which they understand that form of speech or discourse, etc., would not be grounded in that form of life, and that's what allows for some misunderstanding, etc. So the very meaning of the form of speech is very much embedded in the form of life. You just have to be part. You have to actually experience and learn how to live in that form of life. It's not something that you can simply learn by reading. It's something that you have to be there and experience yourself.
As an Indonesian scholar whose research is about Indonesia, then you teach in the US, and then you attend many conferences. I think it's, to my understanding, it's a struggle for you to explain the things that is happening in Indonesia for broader audience that do not really, quote unquote, understand the details. So how you reconcile that?
and that's precisely, that has always been the challenge of anthropology. And anthropology as a discipline is a form of translation, right? Anthropologists go to different parts of the world, live in different culture, and then they have to go back and write and translate that form of life into a form of discourse to be presented to people who do not know anything about the form of life. And that's the challenge of anthropology, and that's what I think personally what makes the discipline worth doing, precisely because the task is really to make something that is very difficult to understand in a way that people who do not have anything to do with it can relate to, right? And that means, for example, proposing questions that have much more, bigger relevance to it, right? So for example, in my case, even if I study Indonesia, my question does not really have anything to do with Indonesia, because my question is, what is religious authority? So people from across the world who are studying religious authority, whether Islamic or non-Islamic, can actually benefit from it. But at the same time, I think it is important to remember that there will always be limits to our ability to translate. And this is my problem with the liberal discourse and the liberal philosophy that assumes ultimate translatability. What I learned from the Islamic tradition, right, even from the Quran, in which you have verses that nobody can understand, right? Alif Lam Mim, Alif Lam Ra, Kaf Ha Ya Ain Sad, etc., is precisely to reaffirm the untranslatability, that there are things that should remain untranslatable. That at the end of the day, we always have a limitation in understanding the others. What those that are radically different from us. And I think that's a very important aspect of humility. And this is why I think anthropology has a lot to teach us, precisely, even if just simply to remind us that there are things out there that ultimately we can never be able to translate. And this, of course, is my problem with the mathematical language, because the mathematical language is premised on the claim
that it's a universal language.
It's a universal language that it can make sense of everything. And I think that's a very dangerous ideology. At the end of the day, we should retain some opaqueness. That at the end of the day, we are always opaque to one another, that we are unique to one another, that we cannot be reduced to numbers. That's what makes human unique from one another.
Yeah, I found it very challenging to be able to interact, to discuss in a Western educational settings in which the paradigm of God or religion is not there. While I think it is important, I think I've watched your lecture as well in Nahdlatul Ulama event, saying that the importance of tahayul, metaphysics, or something that is abstract, the things that we really embrace back then, before the era of the post-colonial, because after that our education seems to distance the concept of tahayul, the things that is the imagine. Yeah. So how do you explain that to the at least students in the West, of that particular dynamics, and
Of the particular...
about the takhayul.
Well, I think, takhayul, right, takhyil, the verb of trying to create an imaginative form, and takhayulat, meaning the imaginal forms, have always been part of human learning, human civilization. I mean, how do we understand something that is abstract, something that is, totally, even the rational. Yeah, one is through, philosophical demonstration, but not everybody can do that. But the second part, and that's what the path that many religious traditions took, is, by actually giving that abstract truth or propositions imaginal forms, right? So that people can understand. And I think everywhere, even today, children still learn some moral propositions from stories, right? It's not important whether the story is true or not, factual or not. What matters is how the stories actually give flesh and give chronotopic a form to an abstract moral ideals. And I think that is very important, and that's part of human civilizations from time immemorial, right? Which is why all great civilizations have their own mythology and their own narratives and their own stories, etc., including all the religious traditions, right? So I think, whenever, for example, I discuss these things to my students, it doesn't matter who got slaughtered, who Abraham was asked to slaughter. Is it Isaac or Ismail? It doesn't matter. I mean, the story can be replicated in so many different things. The ancient Greeks had Agamemnon, who had to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. I mean, same story. And then the gods change it to a ram. I mean, it's the same stories again and again and again, because what matters is not the story, or the truth, the facticity of the story, but it's moral truth, right? It's moral proposition. It's what it tries to teach. And that, for me, is what religion is as well.
Then, how do you contend that with the Islamic intellectual community's departure from the inherent mysticism of religion? That there's an effort made to move away from the idea that there is things that we can't explain.
Yeah, I think then, my short answer with that, you should just stop being religious altogether. If you're trying to, modernize and secularize the religion to the extent that you're going to reject everything that has some, mystical or mythical or untranslatable phenomena, then you lose the whole
point of religion. Exactly, because the whole point of religion is connection with God, and God is not something that we can make an effort to explain, right? God is God.
Yeah, I mean, you can explain it, but the reality will always exceed
exactly
what you are, right?
We cannot limit God to our understanding, to intellectualize.
No, and if there's still if there's still something worth saving from religion in our day and age, is precisely that. Is precisely that it reminds us that there is a beyond, right? That there is a limit, an epistemic limit to what we can know, that there will always be mystery, that there will always be something that is unexplainable, right? There is a, mysterium tremendum. This is Rudolf Otto's term. There's something just, one cannot explain, and I think that is important. So that the idea for me, at least, is so that we do not think that we are the center of the world. You see, that we are the center of the universe.
We are that important. Or...
Yeah, it's not simply about us. It's always about something else. More. There's always something bigger than us. And I think, many human cultures and civilization understand this, whether they are part of the Abrahamic faith or not. But the problem with secularization, and I think, this is what Weber calls disenchantment, right? He calls this in in his Sciences Vocation lecture, in which he talks about, what is disenchantment. Disenchantment is, it does not point to the fact that we know everything. It simply points to the fact that if we want to know, we will be able to know. You see? So it doesn't mean that we know everything, but if we want to know, we are able to know. And that, for Weber, that is the ethos of the secular age and the secular scientific progression, that we can know everything if we want to. And I think, well, first of all, it's just simply a myth. Disenchantment never really happens. But also at the same time, I think it's very dangerous if we think that we can know everything.
I still remember back when I did my study at Islamic boarding school, always at the end of the kitab or lecture, Allah a'lamu bishawab, Allah ya'lamu bishawab. I think that has been missing since I graduated from that particular system. So I mean, like, I believe that you've been exposed to that situation in which during the discussion it seems that, okay, because it always goes back to we have limits, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you are quote unquote trapped in that particular situation, but your interlocutor, I mean your peer couldn't grasp that, how do you explain it at least?
No, I think when it comes to the academic community, they understand. They have recognized that there are things that we cannot know, or at this point we do not know. God knows best. I mean, the scientific ethos is, of course, cumulative, right? That something that you are trying to figure out now, maybe you have certain partial answer to the question, but it does not mean that it already encapsulates the whole totality. It's for the next generation to continue thinking about it. So I think, I think the scientific community recognizes the finitude of our knowledge in truth, and it's something that we need to cultivate, and we need to keep reminding our students, our peers, that it's okay to say you don't know, right? It's fine. That's just part of learning, and having a limit is something that I see as part of cultivating one's humility. And humility is one of the most important virtue of a student of knowledge, right? That we just need to be humble. We cannot know everything. We cannot solve everything. We just know what we are. And I'm glad that, for example, anthropology and history, both the two disciplines that I was trained in, have recognized that at the end of the day, the history or the ethnographic account that we write is just a partial account. It's partial knowledge. Somebody else can do the same research in the same place at the same time and come up with a different ethnography, which is why even historians today no longer write, or call their book as the history of something, the history of Indonesia, the history of Vietnam, etc. No, they would always simply say a history of something, because who knows what's the history of something, right?
Before this conversation, you were against the idea of hegemonic way of understanding Islam. Like you promote the idea of polyphonic. Could you explain more about that?
Yeah, I think Islam is I understand Islam as a project, as a labor of articulating the prophetic past and the community, and through that process you actually engender a particular sunnah that is very much susceptible, that is very much engendered in and through that very articulation, that very dialogue. And so that means that every realizations of Islam, social realization of Islam, what I call the sunnah, is always particular to a very a particular place, which is why I do not believe that there is one version of Islam out there that everybody should follow or is better than anything else. It's just everything is just an outcome of a long process, of a social cultural process on the ground. Because even in a country like Indonesia, the realization of Islam that we see in Aceh is quite different from the one that we see in Tidore and Ternate, etc. Because the history is different, the culture is different, the language is different. Yes, there's some commonality, but also there are differences, and so that is something to be cherished. You know, I'm always skeptical about this kind of modernist aspiration for unity, for uniformity, etc., as if unity and uniformity is what creates strength. No, I think the strength of the tradition is precisely in its ability to become local in different places.
Islam berbeda-beda tetapi tetap satu.
Iya, tetap satu.
It's like within like the broad term of Islam, you know?
I don't know I don't think it's what is the broad term of Islam. It's just an imaginary. I think it comes from a common past. It comes from a common past, which is why I always say the foundation is the past.
The prophetic past.
The prophetic past. But every student of history would be able to tell you that the past looks different depending on the question you ask, depending on where you see it, etc. Right? Depending on the particular present in which you evoke that past. So, what is common is that prophetic past, is the foundational past. I think that is. So the commonality is not the commonality of, it's not, which is why I explained this at the end of what is religious authority. It's not abstract universalism. Abstract universalism is basically said, oh, let's see, there's Islam in Africa, in West Africa, there's Islam in North Africa, there's Islam in Hindustan, there's Islam in Southeast Asia. All of these are concrete, right? So let's look at what is common from one of them. Or then you do what we call abstraction. You abstract from all these concrete cases to create a universe. Oh, so this is what is universal about Islam, whatever it is. But that universality is actually an outcome of abstraction. So the universal is something that hovers above the particulars, right? Yeah. Now I reject that idea. For me, I think it's much more useful and productive to think about Islam's universality or commonality in this case, in the sense of a common ancestor. So to have a common ancestor means that you all trace your origin to a common past, right? But
and then diverge from there.
But diverges, so what is common can be radically different, right? But still, we have commonality simply by virtue of our common ancestors. But we can actually contradict one another. We can actually be very radically different and opposed to one another. But we are still common because we have a common ancestor. Yeah. So I think that's, for me at least, is much more productive way of understanding Islam's universality as a concrete universality.
Could we say that because like Hajj, I see Hajj is very beautiful in a way that people come together in one particular place and doing the same things, but differently with their own particular way of doing things.
No, absolutely. I mean, even in Hajj, people do not really come together, right? Yeah. I mean, there still remains part of their, each remains part of their jama'ah, right? They each have their own, yes, they may suddenly become one jama'ah during the time of prayer, but once the time of prayer is finished, everybody goes back to their own tent and their own hotel rooms and their own community, etc. Yeah. So even Hajj, I think, is just we recognize the sanctity of the place because of our common ancestral time, prophetic time. That's about it. The way we engage there is different from one another. And that for me is healthy. That's human. That's very human.
For people like us in Indonesia, we have a very long and old traditions about Islam, the idea of Islam. But like people in Scandinavian countries, for example, I think Islam is just recently coming into the society. How they reconcile their past with the new reality. I mean, because I think it's very difficult for them, for the first generation, to understand what is their position in the society, while the tradition that they learn from, let's say, Islam in Indonesia, in the Middle East, are so much different with what they see in Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, of course, which is why it takes a while, right? It takes a while for a local and autochthonous form of Islam to develop. In many of the, to go back to our initial example of whether in the United States of America or Australia, you would see that the first mosques that they build are usually ethnic-based mosques or cultural-based mosques, because Islam's history is always a history of arrival. Right? It is always an arrival. There's always, you go to any parts of the Muslim world and you see the originary story, the originary narrative and history. It's always that, somebody from the West comes, or an army comes, or some Sufi saint comes. It's always a story of arrival. And that arrival, of course, it takes a while before you actually have an autochthonous tradition to develop in that place. So yes, the arrival of migrants, Muslim migrants from different parts of the world in places like Scandinavia, that was the initial moment. But for a Scandinavian Islamic tradition to develop, it takes a while.
You need a Scandinavian Muslim community.
Yeah, you need Scandinavians, you need people who are born there as Muslim and they are no longer see themselves as part of their parents' traditions, for example, or new converts, etc. So it's a long process that cannot be enforced.
So you've been interacting with scholars from many countries and then people from walk of life. What do you think is the most important thing that people overseas, of course Indonesia as well, misunderstood about Islam in Indonesia that is uniquely Indonesia in terms of its traditions and its dynamic?
I don't think that Islam in Indonesia or Indonesian Islam is a productive term to think with, because then you are already mapping a very nationalist paradigm into local realities. There's so many different kinds of Islam here. In fact, what is fascinating about Islam in this region that we now call Indonesia is the multiplicity of different Islamic traditions. That's why you go to Ternate, you go to Papua, you go to Cirebon, you go to Banten, you go to Aceh. All of them are very different from one another. And so, the sheer differences of how Islam developed in this archipelago is, I think, one thing that we can, highlight for people living elsewhere, that, Indonesian archipelago is already like a microcosm of the Muslim world, because there's just so many different traditions here. And I think it would be counterproductive if we try to define Indonesian Islam, because you're already using an abstract construct called Indonesia to think about something that is very concrete and concretely developed. I think that would be analytically dangerous.
I learned from you about the term of Waton. I think that's very, I think it's relevant to the argument that you've made, that we are born in particular place, not Indonesia.
No, of course not. Yeah. I mean, this is just a new construct. Indonesia is just a political imagination, right? I mean, it's only been here since 100 years, less than 100 years. God knows how long it is gonna be. But the localities of these regions that make up today Indonesia is something concrete, and they're gonna stay. They're gonna be there, whether Indonesia is present or whether or not. Let's just hope that it remains stable. But it's so precisely, that's precisely why we need to what we need to highlight is not Indonesian Islam, but really all these multiple local realities.
Hundreds, maybe thousands.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, we should refrain from saying that this is something unique about Indonesia.
Yeah.
You go to Hindustan, of course, the Kashmiri tradition from the Goan and from the Bengali, from the Keralan, Malabari, and from the Pathans, they're all very different, right? You go to Central Asia, the same. You go to Arabia, also the same.
So based on our previous conversation, I think, is it correct to you know, because the argument is always like Islam and democracy Islam in democracy in Indonesia. Is it problematic for you to listen or to understand? Like, because people tend to associate democracy with Islam in this particular era in which the hegemony of democracy.
Yeah, but what is the relevance of that question? I mean, why do we need to even talk about Islam and democracy? I just do not see the relevance of the.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the question that I want to ask you.
I think it's just simply a bunch of Muslim intellectuals try to suck up to the West and their form of political normativity, which in this case is democracy. So say, oh, look at us, Indonesia, we are an Islamic democracy. I'm not really. Why is democracy? This political system called democracy becomes the norm, the political normativity in which suddenly Islam has to be somehow calibrated with. I just don't see. I think, you know, it's just not an interesting question. You know, what is the relationship between Islam and democracy? No, I think what is even more interesting is actually the difference between contemporary political normativity, contemporary political ideals, and the Islamic tradition. Instead of trying to adjust Islam to this, you know, new political norms, I think we should just simply look at the tradition and even highlight, you know, the untranslatable. You know, what actually are, you know, things that do not match. That for me is more important, because then in that way, Islamic tradition can provide an alternative vision to the current political vision. You see the difference. So if you say, okay, Islam and democracy are compatible, then you're just simply trying to, you know, pick and choose from the Islamic tradition the points that are compatible with democratic ideals. But instead, if we say, oh, they actually come from they have very radically different assumptions. Yeah. That for me is much more productive and much more interesting as an intellectual exercise. See, it takes a lot of courage, though. Yeah. It takes a lot of courage, but it also takes a lot of confidence.
Yeah, because I think it is against the trend out there to talk about Islam and democracy, because I believe that the argument that it should be born within Indonesia instead of importing them out overseas and try to, you know, accommodate things that some people learn overseas. So after this discussion, maybe we haven't asked something that you think it is important to say, but do you have anything to explain about this particular topic that we've discussed, that people, not only in Indonesia, but particularly overseas, to really understand what is?
Well, I think I've said a lot, and this you know, hopefully what, you know, the things that I've been saying make sense. But I guess if I can have a final message, is I just want to reaffirm the importance of understanding or to learning history and history, of course, and you know, social sciences, precisely because for me, at least religion started to make sense, and we can see its complexity, its dynamic, when we actually embed it in its historical becoming, as opposed to seeing, you know, thinking about, oh, Islam has this kind of transcendent reality that is disembedded from particular history and particular culture, etc., and you abstracted it. Oh, this is an Islamic ideal. Oh, this is the spirit of Islam. Modernists love that, right? You see all these people writing, oh, the spirit of Islam is compatible with democracy and compatible with liberal economics, and etc., etc. I think it is important for us to stay close to the concrete, to stay close to
what is real.
What is real, yeah. To the real, to
what is close
to
around us.
What exists on the ground. I think that's important. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mas Haji.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.